Good evening, my dear friends. Shalom to all of you. This is, if you missed last week, the note at the end, this is pre-recorded, so I am not actually with you live, though I'm not making any promises that I won't show up in the chat somehow, because I'm recording this and jumping on a plane in a few hours to Africa, and I'll talk more about that, God willing, when I return. But I wanted to keep our momentum going in Matthew, because we are in such a rich and dense section of Matthew's gospel, and I just felt like if we take 2 weeks off, that, oh my goodness, we won't even know where to begin. I won't know let me put it this way, I wouldn't know where to begin. And so I want to keep going, and we'll see how far I go in this recording. And yeah, let's just dive into it. So when we left off last week, we'd covered the first part of Matthew chapter 16. We had gotten all the way through verse 20. The last few verses of that, as I said last week, some of the most controversial of verses in all of the Gospels, at least if not the New Testament. So go back and watch that if you missed that. I'm just going to jump right in verse 21. And so Peter has made this supernaturally inspired statement about the identity of his Rabbi Yeshua, and he has said, "You are Messiah, and you are the Son of the living God." Okay, and so then Yeshua has some remarks to say about that, but Peter gets a golden star, A+ for that. And so then this is what happens. So verse 21, from that time, Yeshua began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Now, why is it that it's at this moment, after this divinely inspired confession of who Yeshua is, that now he's ready to go on and tell them, to reveal more to them? That, if you look back through Matthew's gospel, Yeshua's been implying this for quite some time, but now he's directly, it says from that time he began to show his disciples. And so what I imagine that show is, he is what is it that he's actually showing them, as their teacher? My assumption is that he's starting, in their time together, when they're traveling, when they're walking along the roads, when they're reclining, at the dinner table each night, he is bringing up passages from the scriptures, because remember, what I had suggested last week was what Peter had said is actually inspired from Scripture. He's made intentionally or not some great connections to passages in the Hebrew Bible, and has now correctly applied them to this is what God is doing now in Yeshua. And so I think Yeshua's bringing up these passages that indicate, or at least imply, that these things that Yeshua is talking about are going to happen. That this is actually also just as rooted in the Scripture, that he would suffer many things, that he would be killed, and on the third day be raised. That you can find this stuff in the Hebrew Bible if you know where to look. And I think he's showing them where to look. And so I think this is what then, Peter, responding to that, it says, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him which is very unusual for a disciple or student to do to his teacher, his master, his rabbi. And he says, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." And so he's just like, no, 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 no. And the language in the Greek, like he's using double negatives, like he's just emphatic, like absolutely not, Lord. Like that's just no. Like, you're misreading. Like, you think about the audaciousness of that. Like you're misreading your Bible, Rabbi. That's not what that's saying. That's not what's gonna happen to you. And we tend to be hard on Peter. We also have to remember that there's a lot that is spoken through the prophets about what God would one day do to set the world right, to bring justice, to bring righteousness, to redeem and vindicate his people. And it's not always clear that it was going to look like this, like what Yeshua was talking about. It said it often, like the imagery and some of the poetry, it often looks, like, God showing up and just, wiping out his enemies, lifting up his people, restoring the kingdom, all of these things. And I'm quite certain that Peter and the other disciples as well, who grew up in and around synagogue, thinking about these things, hearing these things, and how much more were they thinking about where this was all going, where not just human history, but Israel's history was going with the situation that they were in that moment, occupied nation by Rome, corrupt priesthood, all these things. I'm sure it seemed to them that God has to show up soon and do something, and he's just going to, it's his enemies that are going to suffer and be put to death, but not Messiah. Like, that can't happen. And Yeshua has kind of a strong reaction to being rebuked by one of his disciples. Shouldn't surprise us, I think. But it says, he turned, this is Yeshua, and he said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Which, yeah, it can come off pretty harsh. I think we have to think about what that actually means. Is he saying that Peter is literally Satan? What is Satan? What does that even mean? Satan. In Hebrew, it means like adversary or opposer. And why does he say, "Get behind me"? Because that's the appropriate place for a disciple. What was the invitation that Yeshua gave to all of the 12? He said, "Come, follow me." You can't follow someone if you're standing in front of them facing them. You've actually put yourself, you're actually preventing your rabbi from moving forward with those that are following him. Like you've become an obstacle. You've become an opposer. And so what Yeshua is saying is, you are in the wrong position right now. You are standing in a place of trying to oppose what I'm trying to do. And this is not your place, Peter. You belong behind me, following me. And it's interesting because the language here is almost identical to the language we see when Yeshua actually addresses the Satan, Hasatan, in Matthew chapter 4. And there he just says basically, that, and I'm trying to translate how it looks in the Greek, but it's basically like, "Get, Satan," is what he says in Matthew 4. But here he says, "Get behind me, Satan." And so, yeah, and I think we've seen this already. We're going to see this even more tonight, I think, that there's what Matthew is doing in this large section that is Matthew 14, 15, 16, 17. Is this is at least what I'm noticing is lots of allusions of links using similar language, similar phrases that we've seen all throughout, at least certainly the first half of Matthew's gospel, leading up to this point. We're like finding all of that. And I think there's something very interesting happening in this section of Matthew's gospel. I don't claim to have it figured out yet, but it's something that I'm thinking about. So I want to point it out to you all. So, some of you can also, be thinking about this and what Matthew's doing here in this section that follows the parables. So he says, get behind me. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And so he is diagnosing what Peter's mistake is he's looking at this situation from a very human perspective and not God's perspective. And so, I think it's worth pausing and thinking about what that means. What is it about Peter's refusal to accept the suffering, death, and resurrection of the Messiah that is human, and what is it about the suffering, death, and resurrection of Messiah that is a God perspective? What's the bigger narrative? And I think when we look at, we always have to look at these scenes in context, and where do they happen in the story, and what just happened right before this, and sometimes what happens right after this, and how does that help kind of bring some clarity and some focus to a particular passage. So in this case, we just had this stunning scene of Yeshua bringing them to Caesarea Philippi, and they're still there. They're still, as this conversation is happening, like there's Caesarea Philippi, there's the gates to the underworld, the temple of Pan, there's Mount Hermon, right there, which we'll get to in a moment and its significance. But what you have there is like a visual, physical picture of the lostness of this world and everything that has gone wrong with the nations of this world and their enslavement to demonic powers, and just all of that is the human sin, death, with the gates, like all of that, everything that doesn't belong in God's good world. Like there's a picture of it, a physical picture of it right there before them as this conversation is happening. And what Peter is thinking about is, we've got Messiah now, like we're good, like we can get rid of the Romans, push everybody out, and have our nice little slice of heaven, if you will, with God's Messiah here in our midst, and he can heal anyone and everyone, with a touch or a word. Like we're good now. Like we don't need to suffer. We don't need you to die. Like we could just stay here right with us. Let's keep hanging out. People, as more and more miracles happen, like they're going to start believing and following you, and now we're good. And I'm going to suggest, I think that's the human perspective that Peter has at this moment. That it's just about us and our family, our little group, our little tribe, our little kingdom. And as long as we have Jesus, as long as we have Yeshua, our Messiah, with us, like we're good, like great, like it doesn't matter what's going on in the rest of the world. And I think Yeshua's brought them here because he's trying to help them to think bigger, to think beyond their own special little group, and to realize that there's a whole world that looks like this, and that in order to open up the way for them to come in, because right now what's their option if they want to come close to the God of Israel? Like there's a lot of hoops they have to jump through, and the process of becoming a proselyte and learning and it's a long road that will eventually, if they're male, will include circumcision and so many things. And Yeshua's thing, he's like, if you could just see from God's perspective right now, that like some of them will come and some of them have come that way, but the majority will never come that way. And so I have to do for them what they cannot and will not do for themselves. And so I will suffer, and I will die, and I will rise again. And we will reach these people. I think that's the God perspective. That's my take on it. Would love to hear what some of you think, what gets stirring in your heart and mind, as you think and read this. So then Yeshua told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, which I think also includes denying that human, that wanting to be safe, wanting to be protected, just looking after yourself and your own, would be included in that. And take up his cross and follow me. And where is it that he's going? Where has he been leading them? He's been leading them into dangerous places. He's been leading them, outside their comfort zone. He's been leading them to people, especially these last couple of chapters, to people they have very little in common with, people they don't even fully understand, people that they may even really look down upon, see them at some level as unworthy of the fellowship and love of God. And Yeshua says, yeah, you got to let all that die, and you got to come take up this cross and be willing to die, like deny yourself to the point of death to self, and to follow him. He says, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? And again, this is very similar, right, to that scene in Matthew 4, where what did the adversary offer him? All the kingdoms of this world, right? And you think that the enemy won't offer, maybe a smaller slice of that pie, but something very similar to any of us, to give up, to turn back. He says, or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And that's how Matthew 16 ends. And so there's a couple of interesting things happening here, right in verse 27. So you have the Son of Man coming with angels and the glory of God. So that's clearly an allusion to Daniel 7. And then it's being connected, and he will repay each according to what he has done. And that becomes an allusion to Psalm 62. And so he's kind of taken these two things. And, I'm not going to read both of those chapters. I would encourage you to do that. Read them in parallel with one another, and think about what these two have in common. I don't think they're necessarily two passages that people would put side by side, but Yeshua is doing that. And so he's trying to help us. He's trying to help his disciples to understand what he's doing and what's going on and where this is going. And these are the things he's pointing to. And I would also encourage us to think about what that would mean. What does it mean to repay each person according to what he has done? What is the first thing that jumps into your mind? Is it that means he's going to come and he's going to punish everyone for everything they did wrong? Does it mean he's going to reward everyone for what they've done right? And you can say, well, that's looking at the glass half full or half empty, right? It's two sides of the same thing. What does he mean there? And what is the first thing you think of? And what does that mean to you personally to know, to think about the Son of Man coming to repay you according to what you have done? What does that look like? And then, to cap that off, what does he mean? There are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. That has to be a really strange thing to think about. If you already know the story, you know where it's going. All of the people that were standing there at that moment are now in our time dead. So did they see this? Is that what Matthew is implying? That they saw the Son of Man coming in his kingdom? What does that mean? But I think what we have to now from this point for the rest of Matthew's gospel is look and see anytime something that looks like this happens, is this what he was talking about? Is this what he was talking about when he said they wouldn't see the Son of Man, or they would see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom? And is this maybe even referring to the very next story? Maybe that's a possibility. It doesn't have to be. But the very next story in Matthew 17 is then the transfiguration. So here we are, about 20 minutes in. I'm going to keep going, jumping into Matthew chapter 17. And it says, after 6 days, Yeshua took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise, have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Okay, so there's more to this story, but we're going to stop there. So what's going on here? There's so much happening. Something that Marty Solomon pointed out in his teaching was, which I thought about Mount Sinai, but I never thought about how many connections are in these 8 verses to Mount Sinai, to Moses going up the mountain and meeting with God. So what I would just encourage you is read Exodus 24 and notice how many things that happen there with that first of going up on the mountain with Moses, and what Yeshua is now doing here. Waiting 6 days. It's interesting that Matthew tells us exactly. He doesn't always give us many details. So when the details he does give us always matter. And so after 6 days, Jesus took with him, and it's specifically Peter and James and John. And you notice that after 6 days, Moses took Aharon, Nadab, and Abihu, and so 3 people. And then what happened when Moses was up on the mountain talking with God? He comes down and he doesn't even realize it, but his skin is glowing, his face is shining with light, just like this. So much stuff. And what I bring up about what Marty Solomon noticed in this is, and this is so true, I've taught this in years past before incorrectly, that stupid Peter, he doesn't get it, he doesn't understand what's going on, he's delirious, and so he wants to build tabernacles just because he can't think straight. I think Peter had a good moment last chapter, and then kind of a bad moment, but I think this is a good moment for Peter. I think Peter is noticing the parallels. He's understanding that he's in a Bible story right now, and he's anticipating what the next part of the story would be, and he's speaking up to show, I get it, Rabbi, I understand what's happening. Let's build tabernacles, because what's the very next thing that happens in the story at Mount Sinai with Moses is God gives them the instruction to build the tabernacle. And so Peter's like saying, yeah, I know where this is going. Like, do you want me to do this, right? And obviously that's not what they need to do next. But it's not bad. And I think it's Matthew, showing us that Peter's not, just a stonehead that we paint him as, and that he's learning. He's a learner, and he does understand his Bible for the most part. and he's able to put things together that his rabbi is teaching them. And remember, this him going up on this mountain. This is a teaching thing for them. This isn't just he's just doing things randomly. There's a lesson for them in this moment that he wants them to understand. And let's talk about what mountain. What is the high mountain that he's leading them up to? And there's some debate about this among Bible scholars, but I myself fall in the camp with those that say, look at where this was happening. It's Caesarea Philippi. What high mountain, if you were to look all around, is the high mountain that would stand out to you? It's Mount Hermon, and that to me makes perfect sense that's where he would go up. And I alluded that there's some baggage, some history with Mount Hermon last week, and so now let's talk about that a little bit. When you look at the story in Genesis 6, where the sons of God, looked upon the daughters of men and saw that they were beautiful and came and took, which is that same language from Genesis 3 when the man and the woman took the forbidden fruit. They took wives. These sons of God took wives for themselves. And when the Jewish people in the centuries leading up to this time, the time of Christ, thought about that event and what that looked like and where did that actually happen geographically, they identified Mount Hermon as like ground zero, like that was the mountain on which these rebellious sons of God came down and tried to establish their own kingdom, their own people, all of that. And so, and this was also a mountain that was associated before Israel ever came into the land. It was the Canaanites, the peoples of the land, saw this as a holy mountain, a mountain of the gods. It was a special place. It was a spiritual place. And it was associated with being almost like a gateway between the heavens and the spiritual realm and the physical earthly realm. So that has all of that connected to it. And it's interesting to me too, because when you read this, clearly we're supposed to be reading this passage in parallel with the Exodus story in Exodus 24. And when you look at that story, Moses goes up and he takes three assistants with him, but there's also like the 70 elders that are present on the mountain. And it's interesting then, Mount Hermon also has an association with 70, not coming up but going down, because what Deuteronomy 32 suggests is that the number of the sons of God that the nations were divided up amongst, but I'm not saying that right. There was the number of the sons of God is the same as the nations. And so if you've counted like the table of nations back in Genesis, there's 70, at least in the Hebrew Bible. And so that number 70 then becomes kind of a representative number of all the nations of the earth and all of the powers and principalities that the nations of the earth have been divided amongst, also being that same number. And so that 70 number is also associated with Mount Hermon as the 70 that came down, and then you have the 70 elders of Israel going up. And if you've ever wondered, why is there 70 elders? Because it's that idea, of Israel being a kingdom of priests, and that there would be an elder, there would be a representative in the nation of Israel for every nation in the world. Almost like this is like each one is to adopt a different nation to be an intercessor for, to offer sacrifices on their behalf to God for their restoration, for their healing. And you see from the very beginning that Israel's mission was for the nations. It's not as if Yeshua shows up and now something's like, guys, I know you didn't realize this, but actually what God's been doing with you has always been about the redemption of the world. Like it was that from the very beginning. They just, like we all do, they lost the plot and they forgot why they were blessed, that they were blessed. And we just it's so easy for us to forget. And I hope that we're personalizing these things as we're studying them and thinking about them, that it's easy for us to just thank God for the blessing we've received and not think about, not care at all about all those who have not yet tasted and received the blessing of God and fellowship with God, intimacy with God, restored relationship with the one who made them and loves them. We were blessed to be a blessing. Israel was blessed to be a blessing. And that's why I think the Torah makes such a point, bringing this up over and over again, that the number of the elders and the leaders of Israel matches the number of the nations outside Israel. So anyway, so all of that is going on in this passage. And then on top of that, you have this interesting appearance of Moses and Elijah. And again, I'm going to give credit to Marty Solomon for pointing this out to me, that in the Midrash, which I'm still in the beginning stages of studying and of learning it, and also kind of trying to balance the things I'm learning there with studying what the Jewish people, because a lot of the Midrash, some of it's going to be contemporary at the same time with the period of Christ coming. Some of it's going to predate him a little bit, but there's also a lot of it that comes after, that comes later. And I was reminded even this week as I was studying that we have to be careful listen, pay attention to what the rabbis are saying, what they're thinking as they're studying their Bibles, but let's be careful that ideas and thoughts that came later in Jewish thought after the death and resurrection of the Messiah, we don't take those ideas and just assume that people were saying and thinking those things in the time of Christ. We don't know that for sure. So to be careful. Maybe people were saying this. Maybe they said it later. Maybe the thinking changed after Messiah had come. But it's also good. So it's good to balance those things with the writings from the Second Temple period, the things that we know were in the hands and in the minds and hearts of the Jewish people all the way leading up to and during the time of Christ. So when you look at those things, what you see is that there's lots of stories of Moses and Elijah showing up together. There's lots of stories of Moses and the Messiah showing up together, but it's very rare for Moses, Elijah, and Messiah to show up together. In fact, there's one midrash or commentary on one of the Psalms where these three show up. And so I'm just going to read that really quick. So if you look at Psalm 43, which is probably part of Psalm 42, but like the one Psalm 42 and 43 should be read together. So if you look up, this is a psalm of Korah, and it's it's that the deer that has the deer pants for water, so my soul thirsts for you, God. And when you get to all the way to 43, Psalm 43, verse 3, actually I'll start at verse 2 just to kind of give some of the flavor of this part of the psalm. For you are the God in whom I take refuge. Why have you rejected me? Why do I go about mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy, and I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. Okay, so that send out. So when the rabbis, when the scribes looked at this verse 3, send out your light and your truth, they said, what is the psalmist talking about? What is this light and truth that we should be asking God for? And what they decided, what the conclusion they came to is well, what's truth? Well, Moses brought Torah. Torah is the truth. And so obviously it's appealed to Moses. But then they also thought, Moses brought the truth, but Elijah was zealous for it. He defended it. He was an advocate for it. And so they thought, the truth is represented by Moses and Elijah. And they sort of also end up representing, Torah and the prophets also. But then what is the light? And they said, well, the Messiah, based on passages like Isaiah 42, Messiah is the light. And so what the rabbis taught was, when you're in trouble, when you feel oppressed by your enemies and you can't find God, pray for Moses, pray for Elijah, pray for Messiah to come. And when they do, and isn't it interesting? And let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling or your tabernacle. See, Peter's not dumb. Peter gets what's going on here. And so that's mind-blowing and cool what's happening there. And so here is like that midrash come to life before their eyes. And now it seems like, oh, this is why we're in trouble, and now we're going to have tabernacle time, because God's brought the truth and the light together. And so then, but it's not tabernacle time. Then in verse 5 we see, this, again, very similar to the scene in Mount Sinai, the bright cloud overshadowing, and then a voice from the cloud. And then look what the Father says. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Again, if we've been looking for, where have I heard this before? In the Gospel of Matthew. We heard this way back at the baptism event, which was in Matthew 3, I think. But then, what else is happening here? So, if you look at what the Father says, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. These are 3 direct quotations from 3 different places in the Hebrew Bible. So, and it's interesting is they actually go like backwards. So, this is my beloved Son is from Psalm 2. So that's in the Ketuvim, the writings, the 3rd section of Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. With whom I am well pleased. This is from Isaiah 42. So from the prophets. Listen to him. And so then this is from Deuteronomy 18, where Moses was talking about the one who would come much later, who would be like Moses but better, and would speak with the voice of God, and that we should listen to him. So you have the writings, the prophets, and the Torah, the teaching, all being quoted from in one sentence from the Father. And so he's, and it's interesting to me too, because Psalms, Isaiah, and Deuteronomy are Yeshua's 3 favorite books to directly quote from his scriptures. Not that he doesn't make allusions to all kinds of others, but when it comes to direct quotes, if you look at how many times he directly quotes different books, those are his top 3. And apparently the Father and the Son are one. They love those. And so what's fun about this is another thing that the Jews were saying in the generations before this time, is that when Messiah comes, we will know, because the whole Tanakh will testify concerning him. In other words, the Torah, the teaching, the prophets, and the writings will all 3 testify concerning him. And so here you have the Father quoting from all 3, pointing out, yes, this is my chosen one. This is your Messiah. Awesome stuff. And so, disciples, fall on their faces, terrified, like, wow, right? Which seems to be any time, the Father speaks in the presence of mortal flesh. That's just what we do. But then we have Jesus, and he came and he touched them and he said, rise, have no fear. And it just shows us again, I get into conversations with people sometimes, and even this week, why, if God wanted to speak to us, why would he, humble himself to the point of humiliation by coming in the form of human flesh? If he has something to say, he can just speak from the clouds, speak from the sky, and tell us what we need to know, and that be done with it. Like this Christian gospel, makes no sense. And I would say this is a perfect illustration of why God did that. Because whenever God has spoken to us in that way, we're always scared. We're always terrified. I mean, how can you interact as a human being with a mighty voice from the clouds, from a presence that sets mountaintops on fire? Even when he calls us to come, no, draw near to me. I'm safe. We end up running away in terror. But when he comes as Yeshua, when the Word of God is wrapped in flesh, it can touch us. with a human hand and say, rise, have no fear. How much easier is it for us now to relate to him, to speak to him, to see him for who he is, to see his heart, in the shape of a human being. And, what I said to someone this week is God didn't do that. He did not incarnate himself because he needed to. He did it because we needed him to. He denied himself and ended up taking up a cross in order to reach us and to open the door for us to be able to be set free from irrational fear, and free to come and experience his love, experience intimacy with him, to know him, and to spend our lives knowing him. That's why he did it. And so then when they lift up their eyes, they see no one but Jesus only. And it says, and as they were coming down the mountain, Yeshua commanded them, tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And this, I want to point, often we read past this, we don't notice that. He says, tell no one the vision. I've had so many people struggle with, is it biblical? Is it okay to speak with the dead? And that type of thing. And they'll point to the transfiguration as well. Moses and Elijah were there, so maybe ghosts, are something that are real and we can interact with them and all of that. But this was a vision. And the word there that Matthew uses in the Greek is one that's not used in any of the Gospels, only in Matthew, and then in the book of Acts. And when it's used, it's always about supernatural revelation. It's not like a daydream kind of a vision. They weren't hallucinating. It was a vision from God. But we have to keep the right perspective then on what that means. Just as when Peter had the vision of the tablecloth in Acts, filled with every kind of unclean animal, that wasn't a literal blanket with all the animals on it. It was a vision. It was a vision from God, and it was important. And God was communicating something visually to Peter in that moment, and he was communicating something visually to Peter, James, and John in that moment, and them seeing Moses and Elijah. And I think the things that we talked about in all these connections to the Hebrew scriptures and how the Jews understood them and were interpreting them, helps us understand why they see these two guys. But I don't take the position, and you're free to disagree with me, that literally Moses and Elijah were walking around there on Mount Hermon with Yeshua. I believe it. A vision is a vision. And I think these two men are connected with mountaintops. They're both connected with Mount Sinai, actually, and they both have an experience on Mount Sinai, though it goes very different for the two of them. Moses is commended, while Elijah, that's kind of his moment of failure when he's on the mountain. But that's a whole other story. And so there's so many reasons why it makes sense that they would have the vision of these two guys, but I don't think it's necessary for us to say that they were literally standing there with them and then, their spirits returned to God. Like, what does that even mean? Like, were they there bodily? Were they resurrected and then, at least in especially in Moses' case, and then they died again? Like, what, There's a lot of questions that we can ask if they're there bodily, but that if it was a vision, as Yeshua says it was, that those questions then kind of melt away. And it's interesting that he says the Son of Man is raised. He doesn't say Son of God is raised. He doesn't say Messiah. He says Son of Man. That because the point he's trying to make to them is he is the divine one, the one coming in the clouds of Daniel 7, and he is the suffering servant of Isaiah's. I almost said Isaiah's gospel, which it kind of is. In the back half of the scroll of Isaiah. And so the disciples are thinking, like they're good disciples here. They're taking all this, they're trying to take the lesson, and they're trying to put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4. So they say, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? And so I think, having seen a vision of Elijah, they're reminded again of all this teaching, and they're wondering, and yeah, there's been some talk about comparing John the Baptist with Elijah already many times in this gospel. But now that they've kind of seen a vision of actual Elijah, they're realizing, John isn't like literally Elijah. So they had this vision of Elijah. Is Elijah still coming? Is he going to show up at some point? And if so, shouldn't he have come already? Shouldn't he have come first? Like, they're trying to take all of these things and trying to pick apart the vision, pick apart what the rabbi has said to them, and try to make sense of, what's the lesson, Rabbi? What are you teaching us? And this is good. This is good to ask questions. He answered them, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things, which is what, it's kind of a summing up of the end of Malachi, which is the very last scroll in the section that's called the prophets. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him. That's talking about the scribes, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. And so I think part of the lesson here for the disciples, but also for Matthew's readers, because I'm sure many of them had to be wondering, well, if Messiah had come, wouldn't the really smart people have recognized it? Wouldn't the scribes, the Bible scholars be announcing it from the rooftops? Why are the most educated Bible teachers in Israel reluctant to believe? And again, Matthew's gospel, I think, being written to outcasts, being written to people who weren't seen as, great Bible students and that sort of thing. Like, how are we to, why should we believe when the people that are more qualified than us still struggle to believe? And I think what Matthew is saying is those same smart people they missed Elijah. And so of course they're going to miss Messiah, because like Peter, and this is why it's good to read these stories, like as much of it close together as you can, they've set their mind on human things and not the things of God. And so John wasn't fulfilling what they wanted. Like, they would have thought if Elijah were to show up, he'd be railing against people like King Herod and like the Romans, which John did do some of that, quite a bit of that. But they didn't think that he'd be railing against them. They didn't think if Elijah came that he would be standing in opposition to them and calling them, a brood of vipers, seed of the serpent. And so they couldn't accept him. And so I think Matthew is speaking to his readers and how he's bringing up this story and asking us to think about, if it's hard to believe that Yeshua was Messiah, why is it that we don't like to think that? What did he say? What did he do that bothers us, that offends us? And so because of that offense, we don't want to believe. And remember, going again, this is, the very beginning of this section of Matthew, back in Matthew 14. I think it was Matthew 14 where he said, blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Actually, that might be the previous section before Matthew 13. So, but in any case, he said that before. The people that are struggling to see what he's doing as Messiah-like, that it's probably the reason you're having a hard time seeing is because you're offended. You're offended, and again, that requires denying ourselves, of letting go of human perspectives, self-centered, self-focused perspectives, and allowing God to give us a wider view of who he is and what he's doing. So the disciples get it there, and I'm going to stop right here at verse 13. And I would say next week we'll pick up on verse 14 and finish. But really, there's so much to say, because I think once I finish Matthew 17, I would really love to do a review of everything that we've covered so far in this section. So Matthew 14 through 17, which I think is one big section. I strongly suspect it's a chiasm. I'm still teasing that out. And I also think there's tons of connections going on to all throughout the rest of Matthew, looking backward. And I'd really love to explore that and maybe try to see if we can discover what what Matthew's doing here, because I think it's something brilliant. And I want to spend some time researching that. And I have to get on a plane in a few hours, so I'm not going to have time to record that. And so what I am going to try to do, and we'll see if this works out, is so then a week from today, when you're watching this, at the normal time, 7 p.m. Central, I'll still be on a plane, hopefully, on my way home. And so what I would like to do is, rather than try to do something that night, because I will be so probably jet lagged and wiped out, but the very next day, so Wednesday at our normal 7 p.m. time, I would really love to take some time. We'll let Matthew sit for a week. I think that's okay. 2 weeks is too much for me, but a week I think we can manage that. And especially if we're going to do a review. And I would just love to give you all here on YouTube maybe a little bit of a report on what in the world Nasser was doing in Africa, and just kind of share with all of you. You all get to know me through this weekly Bible teaching, but this is like, I love this. It's something I'm very passionate about, but it's a small part of the things that the Lord has me doing right now, and the activities that my wife and I, and ministries that we're involved in. And so I would just love to share with you some of that stuff. And when I get back would be a perfect time to do that. And so we'll do that next week, God willing. And so again, we'll do it at the normal time, but on a Wednesday and not a Tuesday. And if you're able to join live, great. I'm happy to answer questions and all that, just like before. But it'll just mostly be a time for me to just share with you all about the ministry and the things that I know I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing as you were watching this. That's so funny. It's weird speaking from the past about the future. But yeah, just to let you guys in on some of that. Just I think some of you might be interested in it, and I would certainly love to share more and just have you all praying for us as we continue to serve the Lord in the nations. Okay, cut it off here. Let me just thank the Lord for this wonderful time and the blessing it's been to have this gift of this time tonight. Abba, you are so good. I'm so thankful. All the craziness and the busyness of this week and trying to prepare for this trip, Lord, I didn't even know if I was going to be able to record anything. But I just thank you for your grace and your mercy in waking me up early this morning and encouraging me to take this time and to record this teaching. And Father, I pray that it would bless people. You are the one who leads this. You are the one who inspires us, who teaches us. Holy Spirit, thank you. Thank you for being our comforter, our teacher, our counselor, our advocate. Lord, we pray for fresh revelation of who you are. We're so thankful for this amazing story that we read tonight of the revelation, the vision that these 3 disciples received on the mountain. God, we don't always get that kind of a vision or revelation, God, but every time we open up your word and we open up our heart to see you, to meditate on you in a fresh way, God. What an opportunity it is to fall in love with you all over again. And so, Lord, I pray that has happened for people tonight, and that it continues to happen as we study your scriptures, as we study this gospel for outcasts that we have found in the Gospel of Matthew. Lord, I am so thankful that you are for the outsider and the outcast and those who grew up estranged from you. I'm so thankful, God, that you're for those who grew up in wonderful Christian homes and have loved you from their earliest days. And that's a blessing and a miracle in of itself. But Lord, I'm also thankful that you are for more than those who were always on the inside, that you are also for those who have been on the outside and maybe have been on the outside for generations, God. You long for them to know you. You long for them to be included at your table and in your family. And for that we praise you. We praise you. Holy, holy, holy is our Lord God Yahweh, you are the Almighty One, and you are the all-compassionate, all-gracious, merciful, patient, loyal, faithful, and victorious. You are the victorious one. And we thank you for sharing your victory with us, your people, in the person of our Messiah, Yeshua, in whose name I pray. Amen and Amen. And so, God willing, I will see you all live next week, but one day later from our usual time. And then my hope is then we'll continue again, finishing up Matthew 17 and summing up that whole section the following week. So until next time, my friends.